Hello my dear friends, how are you? I hope I find you all in good health and safe and sound. Welcome, thank you for joining me here. I'm Mari Theriger, and today I would like to talk a little bit about Litha, Midsommar, as Summer Solstice Pagan celebrations, following my recent videos this year on the most important and popular celebrations in the Neopagan calendar. I know I'm a bit late for this one, as the summer solstice is in the mid of June and I'm submitting this video during July, but it could not be helped as there's quite a lot of going on behind the scenes, and I take the opportunity to tell you, for those of course who enjoy my experimental solo music project, VAR UMN, there's a new single called King of the Beasts, experimental metal, as a presentation track for the upcoming album in August. But anyway, I would like to continue with this subject of yearly celebrations on the Neopagan calendar, so let us go straight to it. The more I research about these celebrations, the more I realize quite a lot of the content in them not only isn't pagan, but it's also a great deal of recent romanticisms and inventions of the 19th and 20th centuries. Some of these celebrations do contain some pagan themes, and some of which do come from an ancient past to a certain extent, but the great majority of the content and some celebrations are not pagan in their origins. And these videos end up breaking many fantasies and misconceptions we all have been taught, I included. And I think it's necessary nonetheless, because the romantic movements of the 19th century made it seem that almost everything has a pagan origin, and it's reason enough somehow for people to gatekeep religion, spirituality, celebrations, and so on and so forth, based on a fantasy or a whimsical wish of having some specific ancestry, and then the evidences, the facts completely shake the pretentiousness of people and makes them think about their own life, their own spirituality. It digs through our fantasies and reveals the disgusting effects ego has upon the construction of our personalities. Such personalities often built on foundations that are mere dreams of believing to be better than anyone else, based on the cherry picking of cultures people want to belong to, just to force some authority over completely made up cultures in one's own mind. I think the truth humbles people, and in the case of spirituality, the truth is highly necessary, as modern day New Age spirituality is filled with arrogant, pretentious people trying to buy and sell the very spiritual. So let me talk about Litha before dropping some bombs, as it were. Very briefly, Litha is a midsummer festival that celebrates the power of the sun and the conquest of night, very poetic. The summer solstice has been an important focal point of the year in Neopagan movements. On the 21st or 22nd of June, in the northern hemisphere, the sun reaches the end of its seasonal wanderings, the moment when no other day is longer and no night shorter. So in the Neopagan calendar, this day is marked by the festival of Litha, and represents the triumph of light over darkness. Just like any other celebration of the Neopagan calendar here spoken before, this day in Europe has been, of course, traditionally marked by huge bonfires. We just love to burn stuff, and once again people love to jump over the flames for some blessings, to be cleansed or to have good luck. I myself have done that. All over Europe, it is often assumed that Christians incorporated Midsummer festivities into their calendar by joining them to the feast of Saint John. In my own country, it's the exact same thing. Although there are some pagan themes within the celebration itself isn't pagan, but Christian. It wasn't Christians that incorporated Midsummer festivities into their calendar. Christians at this time of the year did indeed celebrate the day in honor of Saint John, and only later, during the nationalist romantic movements of the 19th century Europe, a new narrative was fabricated that this festivity was, after all, of pagan origins. In terms of what we know about Litha from a pagan past, there's practically nothing. Its pagan origins are mostly recent fabrications. However, Litha indeed has become or has developed into an important celebration in modern paganism. And that's the thing. There's no problem with that whatsoever. Religion, spirituality has always been a work in progress of several developments and adding several elements, as well as inventing new traditions, new celebrations. That's normal, perfectly normal. The only problem here is when people make up an historical past and distort the whole truth and the very conception of historical reality. I mean, there's no doubt that these midsummer celebrations do have some pagan themes. After all, the early church did not often deny the existence of other deities and other religious celebrations, and made the point to incorporate several pagan themes into the liturgical calendar. However, this celebration is Christian. Its origins are Christian. It was important to incorporate some pagan themes and traditions to unify people and, in great part, creating many celebrations with familiar themes to unite people and to keep peasants occupied and happy to avoid conflict and revolt. Litha, in its significance and meanings, has been highly developed in modern paganism. And with this being said, let's talk about the Scandinavian Mitsoma. Very well. In the last decades, I would even say in the last 100 years in Europe and elsewhere, but mainly in Europe, which then eventually influenced other countries that showed an interest in the ancient religions and spiritualities of Europe. Well, we have been witnessing a kind of spiritual renaissance linked to the cycles of nature, often linked to the desire to rediscover ancient pagan traditions that, because they are generally quite difficult to detect and to have a concrete overview of them, because the evidence in terms of how the ancient religions and cults of Europe were conducted is scarce, and material culture does not allow us to know about ancient religiosities in greater detail. These religions have been reinvented from scratch for the most part. Returning to the theme of this video, the celebrations of the summer solstice are a clear example of this. For example, in many Nordic countries, the night between the 23rd and 24th of June has come back into fashion with lots of flower decorations, bonfires and dancing. A festivity reinterpreted as a pagan or even Neopagan or ancestral celebration, even when its origins is, as usual, as I said, Christian, as I mentioned earlier, right? It is often assumed that celebrations like the Swedish Midsommar are a direct survival of ancient pagan solstice cults. In reality, there is no reliable historical or archaeological evidence that links this celebration to pre-Christian religious practices. As I said to you earlier, when you look into these subjects more deeply, the more you dig into this, from the perspective of someone who is a pagan and wants to know about these historical pasts, it ends up being very frustrating. And I understand that. I've been there. I understand that for many of you it is frustrating too, but it is what it is. As I was saying, all available documentation from medieval liturgical calendars to historical chronicles indicates that Midsommar emerged as a Christian celebration of the nativity of Saint John the Baptist. And it is highly likely that the traditions associated with it originated in following centuries as forms of popular belief. In other words, it is not only the celebration itself that is Christian, but some elements in the celebration that seem to be pagan may very well have originated in popular folk traditions only after the celebration was introduced by Christianity. But of course, popular traditions and folklore have a lot of content from many different moments in history and from various cultural, traditional, linguistic, historical, religious elements, etc., that remain in popular memory over time. And this generates a popular tradition whose basis is a great syncretism of ideas and concepts, and also, of course, there are some pre-Christian contents in popular beliefs. But nevertheless, when these popular beliefs were later on added to the Christian celebration, we are talking about, in here, the Midsommar, the solstice celebrations, and this is applicable to many others, people were neither pagans nor had any notion of the origins of the content of their popular beliefs, but rather popular beliefs and folklore are a reality that evolves and is applied, adapted, and constructed, meaning pagan themes in popular tradition and beliefs added to the Christian celebration of the summer solstice were added not because they were pagan, that the people were not pagan, but because it was within the popular beliefs at the time, unbeknownst to the people of the time concerning the origins of such beliefs. To give another example, the story, that rather popular idea that the church replaced, for example, the celebration of the winter solstice with Christmas, is now supported by a small minority of scholars, since December 25th was chosen based on calculations from the date of conception according to the scriptures, and the cult of Sol Invictus seems to have been established several years after the first reliable attestations of the celebration of Christian Christmas in December. The Scandinavian pre-Christian Jol itself had nothing to do with these days, but was a rotating celebration according to the phases of the moon, more specifically the full moon, after the winter solstice. It began to be celebrated at Christmas time after the 10th century on a fixed date by the Christian King Håkon Haraldsson, or Håkon I, because the idea was to celebrate the Christian celebration, which did not arise due to incorporating a pagan one, but rather a proper Christian celebration, which in the early days of this change in Scandinavia led to this confusion of not knowing exactly when Yule was celebrated, because the pagan celebration and the Christian one were two different things. But the Christian one was also eventually called Yule in Scandinavia. The pagan themes of Christmas is due to the rich content of popular beliefs added to this celebration, and not Christmas having been constructed from a pagan basis. Similarly to Halloween, which derives from All Hallows Eve and has no documented ritual continuity with the previous celebration, even though everyone is absolutely certain of the contrary despite having no proof. And I already made several videos about this last October, and I think some points should be rectified at some point. And even for Midsommar, the Swedish Midsommar, we have no literary, liturgical, or archaeological evidences that attests to pre-Christian solstitial cults in Scandinavian countries. I know this is hard to accept, especially for those who are just starting out in paganism and already come with quite a lot of preconceived ideas. I get that. I've been there. Many of the Neopagan ideas and written stuff that today attribute ancestral meanings to dances, bonfires, or summer solstice songs are the result of 19th century romantic interpretations born in a time when the idea of rediscovering the roots of the people was central to the construction of national identities. I've also talked about this here many times before in other videos. It was in this climate of nationalist romanticism of the 1800s that people began to attribute supposed pagan meanings to every element of folklore, from flowers woven into hair or to runes carved in the woods. In fact, whenever you go in search of the origin of some superstition, tradition, or popular belief that seems to lend itself well to the theory of the survival of something pre-Christian, you always discover that instead, these are elements born in the Christian era, whose origin cannot be traced back more than a few centuries at best, and that the connections with the pagan world are only the result of our fantasies about what that world must have been like. It's sad and frustrating. I mean, will this put an end to my long years as a pagan? Of course not. It only strengthens my beliefs and practices because it allows me to be closer to the truth and how I want to conduct things without any ancestral, traditional, and cultural pressure. As I said before, the romantic interpretations of the 19th century with all this ideological drive had several negative consequences, two of which the invention of a uniform, idealized, monolithic pagan past, often without any basis in any available historical sources, and the production of seductive but unfounded cultural narratives which still survive today in tourism, souvenirs, souvenir shops, fantasy novels, and now memes about Celts and Vikings and so on and so forth. For example, a quick search for Viking jewelry and utensils, and the things that come up most are keychains, rings, mugs, either with the Ægishjálmur or with the Veikvisir. And these symbols are the most tattooed Viking symbols ever. They are not Viking, they are not Scandinavian, they are not religious symbols, they are not from the Iron Age, the Scandinavian Iron Age, or the early Middle Ages, and the medieval era even. They are galdrastafir, magic staves, from modern Iceland, magical symbols with a wide variety of cultural origins, culminating in the consolidation of various magical traditions from Europe and the Middle East, following the compositions of Solomonic sigils, which later developed in Iceland from the 1500s onwards. That is just one example. There are more serious examples, such as using the term Indo-European to express a uniform, idealized pre-Christian past of Europe, often with a racial idealization and a broad invention of a historical past that never existed. I mean, practically 99% of the studies on Indo-Europeans before the 20th century are to be forgotten and thrown away because they are not based on anything historical, but rather on the romantic, racial, and political nationalist idealizations of the 19th century. And the vast majority of studies or other content on various internet platforms about Indo-Europeans today are based solely or in most part on these inventions of the past. The term Indo-European has been so corrupted by these romantic and racial interpretations that even today, in academia, it is almost taboo to conduct studies on these subjects because most of the sources are biased and completely unfounded. And then when there are really good scientific studies on these subjects, on the matter, on Indo-Europeans, people do not accept them. The general public does not accept them. And the researchers then have no great way out, and the studies do not continue. Because it is difficult to accept the historical truth when one has been living in a tremendous romantic fantasy about our past for more than a century. Anyway, continuing with the subject of this video, the truth is, although less romantic and appealing to be sure, is that the pagan belief systems of Northern Europe are largely irretrievable. This is a truth that Scandinavians and other Europeans are well aware of, at least the people who study these subjects. We have lost much of our pre-Christian past. There are huge gaps in the sources, and what we do have is mostly written in the Christian era, filtered by editors who often sought to frame the tales within a theological or moralistic vision. For this reason, any attempt to reconstruct the original pagan meanings behind Christian celebrations, such as Midsommar or Jónsmessa, is always conjectural and often ideologically motivated. It's not traces of surviving paganism. It's more like echoes of a reinvented paganism. When we see people explaining in great detail the pre-Christian practices of Europe, how worship was done, how it is done, how religions, rites and ceremonies were conducted, how it is conducted, these are people giving you inventions constructed during the romantic nationalist movements of the 19th and 20th centuries that later influenced other inventions and theories without historical basis throughout the 20th century and even today, especially in New Age religions, and or personal interpretations, often to sell you something, especially workshops on how to commune with the ancestors and the gods and any other nonsense. The thing is, it's perfectly fine to conduct our spiritualities the way we want. What's not okay is to lead people into a complete falsehood and take advantage of their ignorance, and often taking advantage of their despair to earn money from feeding lies and pretending to be the authority on the religious traditions that have been passed down to me through my ancestors who held on to their ancient beliefs and were uncorrupted by the new religion. A bunch of fucking nonsense. Of course, countries, the state, take advantage of this as well. When in contemporary cultural tourism, for example, in the case of Iceland, it is taken for granted that Iceland, so often evoked by its sagas and invisible creatures and Norse paganism, etc., has its own pagan celebration of the solstice. But surprisingly, this is not the case, or not so surprisingly, I guess, given what has been already said here in this video. In Iceland, Jónsmessa, St. John's Mass, has never been a holiday of great popular significance, at least not in the ceremonial and festive sense that one might expect elsewhere. But it kind of is today. I mean, it is true that during the Catholic era from the year 1000 to 1550, the day was considered holy. Between 20 and 30 churches were dedicated to John the Baptist alone or with other saints, and it was kept as an official holiday until 1770, well after the Protestant Reformation. And this indicates a continued atmosphere of solemnity around June the 24th even beyond the confines of the Catholic worship. But there are no reports of collective rituals or community celebrations similar to the Swedish Midsommar. Probably for practical and agricultural reasons. Jónsmessa fell into a time of the year when the main tasks of rural life were temporarily suspended. The lamb season was over and the sheep had already been moved to the high pastures. The meadows had been fertilized and haymaking had not yet begun. For this reason, it is believed that the Þingi, Icelandic General Assembly, was summoned at this time, at this period. It was the time when most of the population could take a break and travel. During the Free State era, Þjóðveldi, the Þingi met in mid-June and lasted for 2 weeks. Although there are no direct sources, it is likely that in addition to the legislative business, there were also private celebrations, markets, and family gatherings. However, unlike many European traditions, the night of Jónsmessa in Iceland was not strongly linked or associated to traditions of ghost or witchcraft. This is probably because the night of June the 24th is almost entirely illuminated by twilight alone, and spirits, as we all know, can hardly stand the light, or so folklore tells us. But anyway, as I was saying, however, Jónsmessanótt, the night before St. John's Day, appears in folklore as one of the 4 most powerful or prodigious nights of the year, along with Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, and Epiphany. They were said to be favorable nights for sitting at crossroads, places full of liminal energy between the worlds of the living and of the dead, hearing animals speak, seeing seals emerge from their skins and assume human form and invade the country. All of these beliefs are passed down in 19th century folklore. So in Iceland, Jónsmessa night has never become a collective celebration with the characteristics of a feast or festival, but has always been a magical night of sorts, full of folk beliefs and magical practices in folk traditions. No bonfires, no trees to decorate, no outdoor dining, but there are a series of practices like picking specific stones and moss during this night because it is a magical night full of magical potency. But just like the Swedish Midsommar or other Midsummer or Summer Solstice celebrations throughout Europe, it does not have pagan origins. These are celebrations of Christian origin. However you feel concerning this information, it is no concern of mine. You do whatever you want with the information shared in these studies in this channel. The truth is out there always. We may not like it at times, and many times the truth may either be boring or just ordinary, but it makes us grow and face reality and conduct our own life towards a more constructive and well-defined existence, and not without magic and wonder, because there's much beauty and magic in the real world still. And our personal fantasies often do not allow us to see such beauty and magic. My dear friends, I do hope this video was useful. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, tack för idag. Thanks for today. Obrigado por hoje. Until we meet again, my dear friends.